Hello all, this is Steve from Gaming Friends. I'm ranking each game in the Silent Hill series, from worst to best, and I'm going into detail on the elements that work and those that don't. And today, I'm talking about Silent Hill Shattered Memories. Silent Hill Downpour might have been an ambitious but failed experiment, but Shattered Memories took a chance and actually got it right. It managed to completely shake up the formula of the main games while remaining quintessentially Silent Hill. It also gets bonus points for making it clear from the offset that this was just a one-off and not the direction the series as a whole was taking. What makes Shattered Memories so interesting is how difficult a game it is to label. It's not really a remake because it's so different. It's not a reboot because it sticks so closely to the original game's lore. If I had to describe it in any way, I'd very pretentiously mimic the game's title and call it a splintered recollection. The title, Shattered Memories, manages the rare feat of sounding generic as all hell, but at the same time is perfectly accurate and functional for the game's purpose.
We can start now.
I guess Shattered Memories is best seen as a reflection upon the events of the original game. Those events took place, and the only major changes are the ones the player projects onto it. The game is split into two segments. There's the past, in which Harry explores Silent Hill looking for Cheryl. And there's the present, where you are in a psychiatrist's office, presumably recovering from the events that took place there. How you behave in the psychiatrist's office and in the main game affects how you remember the events of the past. For example, if you constantly get distracted by trivial items in the game, or let your gaze wander in the psychiatrist's office, it leads to monsters with multiple flesh wounds and decay. It's as if to suggest they have been distracted from taking proper care of themselves. A survey you take early on asks if you like to drink to calm down. If you answer yes, the monsters become bloated and covered in disease. It's comforting to know that this is more or less how I'd be viewed in Silent Hill. This is a neat enough trick in and of itself, but what's especially impressive is how well it sets the foundations for the surprise ending. In my second favourite twist in the entire series, it's revealed that the person in the psychiatrist's office is not Harry at all, but Cheryl, the little girl Harry is searching for. And while his name can be seen on the door of his office, attention is never drawn to the fact that the psychiatrist is Michael Kaufman. You might remember him from the first Silent Hill game as a cult member from the Order of Silent Hill. His goal is to try and pit Cheryl against Harry, and how well they succeed is ambiguous, and more or less up to the player to decide. He tries to instill the idea that Harry, essentially, is an alcoholic and a total creep. And what they mean by that is that you, the player, are a total creep. And if you act the way most players do in video games, well, you might think they're onto something. The game constantly teases you, innocently prodding you towards searching women's bathrooms for items, or drawing your attention to pictures of half-naked women. If you spend long enough doing this, other female characters will become sexualized, reinforcing the idea that Harry was nothing more than a pervert in Cheryl's memory. It plays on the gamer's insecurities as well, asking personal questions and providing a psych evaluation which, based on the two playthroughs I've done, are never positive. Either way, it leaves the player with an overall sense of despair at how they've acted. I really enjoyed this game and was surprised it was as ambitious and successful in its ambition as it was. And while I've said nothing but positive things about Shattered Memories so far, it's no bowl of Special K. It still has some flaws. One issue is based largely on the formats the game was released. While it could be played on both PS2 and PSP, it was promoted largely as a Wii title. Many of the game's gimmicks were centered around the Wii remote as a controller. For the most part, that's exactly what they are, just gimmicks. You can answer your phone and listen to the call on your remote instead of from the TV. Tricks like this add a small layer of immersion, but not so much that it's really worth mentioning. The main gimmick, which is simultaneously the most effective and the most problematic, is the flashlight. The concept is inarguably sound. Moving the Wii remote like a flashlight is very immersive when it works, and it worked better than most games I had played on the Wii console. There are moments where I felt more a part of Silent Hill than in any other game in the series. The problem is that these moments are brief, and when they end, they swing wildly in the other direction. Connectivity between the remote and the sensor bar can be temperamental. When Harry is stuck pointing his light at a second-story window until you angle your arm in just the right way, that breaks atmosphere. There may have been many Wii games with worse controls than this. It's simply an issue that plagues the hardware and unfortunately harms this game. The main issue, however, is even more fundamental than the controls. It just isn't that scary. It seems far more preoccupied with making you feel insecure and confused than actually horrified. If that's all the game was aiming to do, I could forgive it. But the action segments make it clear this isn't the case. This might be subjective to the player, but looking at each game objectively, I think I can prove that it is one of the least unsettling games in the series. The first important thing to take note of is the fact that the monster encounters happen at fixed intervals and are actually flagged by a layer of ice covering everything in sight. As soon as you find out these occur at fixed intervals, the town loses some of its mystique. Unlike previous entries, it becomes less like a living, breathing entity and more of a ghost train ride with mechanical attractions. One of my favourite things about the earlier games was never knowing when something might attack you. But here, you realise quickly that you're always safe unless the ice starts forming. For what it's worth, exploring the town is still a lot of fun to do, which is impressive considering you quickly become aware that there's not a lot to be afraid of. It's got a surprising amount of detail in its environments, and it does world building, I would argue, better than any other game in the series. While the idea of monsters altering their appearance is a really good one, it's actually somewhat wasted because you spend all of your time frantically running away from them rather than examining them closely. I only noticed the changes when replaying and actively looking out for them, and even then, the ordeal feels like running a marathon through an art gallery. I needed to stop and almost let the monsters grab me in order to get a proper look. As a result, the monsters really are just generic, nondescript blobs at the end of the day, which is a shame considering the good intentions behind their design. You can't attack them as in previous games, which is supposed to make the chase very tense and nerve-wracking. But it strays a little too far onto the easy side of things. Your getaway is always clearly marked, and even if you're caught, you can shake up to 3 of the monsters off you by waving the Wii remote. I think I only died once, and even then, I was only sent back to the start of that short segment. The stakes are just too low to make it in any way tense. Shattered Memories is a great experiment that plays with the medium of gameplay and the concept of franchises. It does this in some really original ways to create a spectacular puzzle box of a story. It's the first Silent Hill game on this list that I can honestly say is a really great game. The only thing that lets it down is the fact that this is about as scary as this. But hey, Medieval is a great game that doesn't need to be scary. So maybe we can just appreciate Shattered Memories for what it is, rather than for what we think it should be.